The whispers didn't start loud. They started nervous. The kind of hush that creeps through glass offices and gated neighborhoods when people stop asking questions out loud and start texting instead. Because somewhere between late-night calls and suddenly rescheduled meetings, the word spreading behind closed doors was simple and terrifying. Something is circling and it's not going away. This isn't a headline about a bad week or another social media pile-on. This is the kind of story that makes phones vibrate at 2 a.m., that sends advisors into emergency mode, that turns carefully polished smiles into stiff masks. Because the chatter right now isn't about optics or reputation, it's about pressure. Real pressure. The kind that doesn't blink, doesn't care about titles, and definitely doesn't care about curated narratives. And according to people who claim to know what's happening off camera, Meghan Markle is scrambling. Not panicking publicly, not yet, but scrambling privately, where things matter more, where the tone shifts, where every sentence is weighed, every document reread, every past decision suddenly feels louder than it did before. The kind of scrambling that doesn't look dramatic on Instagram but feels suffocating behind the scenes. Because the story circulating in hushed tones is that what started as routine questions has quietly intensified. And when pressure intensifies, it means someone isn't satisfied with the answers. Behind closed doors, the word IRS is no longer being spoken casually. It's being spoken carefully. Here's the part that has people leaning in. This isn't about a single red flag or a sloppy filing that can be waved away with a press release. Insiders say this feels different, layered, cumulative, uncomfortable. Like someone started pulling on a loose thread and realized it wasn't loose at all, it was holding the whole thing together. The charity at the center of this narrative, once marketed as the crown jewel of post-royal independence, was supposed to be untouchable. It wasn't just a foundation, it was a statement. Proof that life after the palace could be cleaner, freer, more ethical, more modern. Proof that the old system was the problem, not the people who left it behind. And now, that very symbol is the thing raising eyebrows. People close to the situation describe a sudden shift in mood, a tightening. Calls that used to be friendly now feel procedural. Questions that once sounded optional now come with follow-ups. The kind of follow-ups that don't disappear when you don't answer fast enough. What's making this story explode isn't confirmation, it's contrast. The contrast between what's being said publicly and what's allegedly happening privately. Because while official voices insist everything is routine, sources claim the atmosphere inside the operation feels anything but. Words like review and clarification are being replaced with documentation and explanations. And when documentation becomes the focus, nobody relaxes. According to whispers from people who've seen the internal reactions, this is where Meghan's legendary control kicks into overdrive. Meetings multiply, language is tightened. Everyone suddenly knows exactly what they're allowed to say and what they're not. The brand becomes quieter, sharper, more defensive without ever admitting it's defensive at all. That's usually the tell. Because when nothing is wrong, you don't need to rehearse calm. The pressure, insiders claim, isn't just external, it's internal. Old decisions are being revisited, past numbers are being re-examined, expenses that once felt justified are now being re-explained, and the most uncomfortable question of all is quietly hovering in the background. Why does this keep not adding up the way people expect it to? This is where the narrative gets messy. Charities don't collapse overnight, they erode. They lose people, they lose clarity, they lose the benefit of the doubt. And sources say that erosion has been happening for a while, long before anyone outside the inner circle started paying attention. Staff turnover that was brushed off as restructuring, strategic pivots that felt reactive rather than visionary, sudden changes in operational language that sounded sophisticated but didn't fully explain why they were happening now. Observers in the nonprofit world have been quietly side-eyeing the numbers, not because they scream guilt, but because they whisper imbalance. And imbalance is what attracts scrutiny. The thing about scrutiny is that it doesn't care about intention, it cares about patterns. And once patterns form, they're hard to unsee. People familiar with how high-profile organizations are reviewed say this is the moment where stress levels spike. Not because something has been proven, but because uncertainty is worse than accusation. You can fight an accusation, you can spin a headline, but you can't control an open-ended process once it's rolling. That's where the scrambling comes in. Allegedly, advisors are split on strategy. One camp believes in aggressive reassurance. Drown the narrative in confidence, keep repeating that everything is fine until people get bored. Another camp is urging caution, silence, minimal exposure, because every word spoken publicly becomes another thing someone can later dissect. Meghan, sources claim, hates silence. Silence creates space for other people to tell the story, but this time even she may be forced to wait. And that waiting is reportedly causing friction, not just professionally, but personally. Because when a brand is built on narrative control, any situation that removes control feels existential. This isn't just about money or paperwork, it's about identity. The image of competence, of moral authority, of having done things the right way while others didn't. That's why this story feels heavier than past controversies. Because this isn't about who said what in an interview or who unfollowed whom online. This is about systems, structures, and questions that don't care about celebrity. And people who've watched powerful figures face this kind of pressure before say the same thing every time. The real drama happens long before the public ever knows. Late nights, short tempers, emergency revisions, that constant quiet fear that something small you overlooked years ago is suddenly very, very loud. And here's the most unsettling part. According to multiple whispers, no one inside the operation can say with certainty when this phase ends. There's no countdown clock, no neat resolution, just ongoing attention, and attention is the one thing Meghan Markle has learned to fear when she doesn't control it. Because attention without control turns admiration into interrogation. And once that shift happens, every move feels reactive instead of powerful. Right now, everything about this situation feels in between. Not exploded, not resolved, not dismissed, just suspended. Tense. Waiting. The kind of waiting that keeps people awake. The kind of waiting that makes every ring of the phone feel heavier than the last. And if insiders are telling the truth, this is only the opening act, because pressure doesn't intensify unless someone believes there's more to find. What makes this phase especially dangerous isn't what's being said, it's what isn't. People on the inside describe a sudden absence of casual chatter, the kind of quiet that replaces confidence when everyone realizes every sentence could someday be replayed, reread, or reinterpreted. That kind of quiet doesn't happen unless the stakes feel real, and the stakes, according to whispers, feel suffocating. Behind the scenes, the narrative is no longer about weathering a storm. It's about containment, about narrowing exposure, about deciding who needs to know what and who absolutely doesn't. Because once scrutiny intensifies, information becomes currency and leaks become liabilities. Sources claim this is where Meghan's operation starts to look less like a glossy lifestyle brand and more like a crisis bunker. Trusted voices only, tight circles, conversations that stop when new people enter the room. Every decision filtered through one unspoken question. How does this look if someone else sees it later? And that question is exhausting. People who've watched high-profile collapses up close say this is the stage where confidence quietly drains away. Not dramatically, not publicly, but subtly, in posture, in tone, in the way people avoid committing to long-term plans because the future suddenly feels conditional. Conditional on answers, conditional on outcomes, conditional on whether the pressure eases or tightens further. What's adding fuel to the fire is the growing sense that this scrutiny didn't come out of nowhere. Insiders suggest it's the result of accumulation. Small things stacking up over time, none explosive on their own, but together forming a picture that made someone finally stop and look closer. Expense structures, operational choices, timing that didn't quite line up. Not accusations, but inconsistencies. And inconsistencies are catnip for institutions that specialize in questions. Those close to the situation say Meghan is acutely aware of how fragile moments like this can be. She's seen what happens when narratives flip. She's watched public figures go from untouchable to untethered in a matter of months. She knows that once credibility cracks, everything else follows. That's why the scrambling isn't chaotic. It's surgical. Allegedly, teams are reevaluating old messaging, adjusting language, quietly stepping back from certain talking points that once felt safe. There's a noticeable shift from bold declarations to vague reassurances, from expansive visions to careful phrases like ongoing work and long-term goals. The shine dulls when certainty disappears, and then there's the human element, the part that doesn't show up in filings or press statements, the stress bleeding into relationships, the tension between advisors who disagree on how aggressive or how quiet to be, the fatigue of defending something that suddenly feels heavier every time it's explained. People close to the operation claim tempers are shorter, trust is thinner. Everyone is hyper-aware of optics, but no one feels entirely sure what the right optic even is anymore. That's the paradox of this moment. The instinct is to project calm. The reality is unease. And while public silence can look strategic, insiders say it feels more like being frozen, waiting for the next move to reveal itself before committing to anything that can't be undone. What really rattles people who've been in similar situations is the unpredictability. There's no script for how long scrutiny lasts or what direction it takes. One day, everything feels manageable. The next, a new question surfaces and suddenly everyone's back in emergency mode. And according to whispers, that cycle is wearing people down. Some are reportedly questioning whether this foundation, once the centerpiece of an entire reinvention, has become more liability than legacy. Whether the very thing meant to prove independence and integrity is now anchoring them to uncertainty. That's a terrifying realization for anyone who built their post-royal identity around it. Because if the foundation stumbles, it doesn't stumble alone. It drags optics, partnerships, credibility, and future opportunities with it. Every potential collaborator starts hesitating. Every invitation feels tentative. Every conversation carries an unspoken subtext. Let's wait and see how this plays out. And waiting is poison in an industry that thrives on momentum. Sources claim Meghan is keenly aware of that ticking clock. She knows relevance doesn't pause for investigations or reviews or clarifications. She knows the world moves on quickly and not always kindly. That's why the pressure to regain narrative control is reportedly intense. But narrative control only works when the ground beneath it feels solid. Right now, it doesn't. What's especially unnerving, insiders say, is the fear that even if nothing catastrophic emerges, the process itself could do lasting damage. Scrutiny changes how people are perceived, even when it ends quietly. It plants doubt, it invites speculation, it gives critics something to point to long after the headlines fade. And Meghan has critics waiting eagerly. The silence from certain former allies hasn't gone unnoticed. The absence of public defenses that might have appeared in earlier years now feels loud. People who once rushed to reassure are suddenly busy elsewhere. That kind of absence speaks volumes in Hollywood and philanthropic circles alike. Everyone is watching, everyone is calculating. And the calculation is simple. How risky is association right now? This is the part of the story that rarely gets told. The slow narrowing of space around a public figure. Not canceled, not condemned, just circled, evaluated, weighed. That's when scrambling turns inward. According to whispers, Meghan is pushing for future-facing plans, new initiatives, new angles, new narratives, but even those are reportedly being filtered through caution. No one wants to launch something that could be overshadowed by lingering questions. No one wants to build momentum on unstable ground, so things stall, and stalling is not a luxury she's used to. People close to her say this may be one of the few moments in her public life where she doesn't fully control the timeline, where the next chapter depends on processes she can't speed up or redirect, where patience is required, and patience has never been her preferred weapon. That tension is palpable, because if the pressure eases quietly, the story fades. But if it escalates, even slightly, everything changes. And that uncertainty is the real headline here. Not collapse, not confirmation, but the slow realization that once institutions start asking questions, they don't stop just because the answers are inconvenient. Right now, Meghan Markle isn't fighting a verdict. She's fighting time, perception, and the possibility that some stories don't end when you want them to. They end when someone else decides they're finished looking. And until that moment arrives, the doors stay closed, the voices stay low, and the scrambling continues. Not in public, but where it matters most. Because in this game, the loudest chaos often happens in silence.